Hey everybody, this is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and before we get into the action today, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about Anchor. Anchor is a great app and it is free to use. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Did I mention it's free? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. That's the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started today. Happy podcasting. And now, let's get into it.
What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Welcome to episode number 9, where today we are talking about Van Halen's debut album, self-titled Van Halen, released in 1978. Van Halen is one of the greatest rock bands of all time, in my opinion. I think everybody likes Van Halen, whether you're a David Lee Roth fan, a Sammy Hagar fan, or any of the other vocalists they've had. But we're not going to get into that today. Everybody loves EVH, Eddie Van Halen. Of course, this first album, as I said, came out in 1978. Talked about it a little bit on my favorite artists from the 70s. I know this came out on the tail end of the 70s, but go back and listen to that one. That was episode number 7, if you want to check that one out. But to get into the lineup a little bit before we get into the specific track-by-track breakdown. So Van Halen consists of, at the time of this release at least, because as with many bands, Van Halen also went through some lineup changes. But this album, we of course have David Lee Roth, Diamond Dave on vocals. Incredible stage presence, David Lee Roth. Really unique vocals with his wailing and his kind of almost shrieks, I'll call them. A lot of energy, a lot of fun in his performance. On guitar, we have none other than the late, great, and it is sad to say that, but Edward Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen. If you're a guitar player or even a fan of rock at all, you know his work. He has played some of the most iconic, just songs, and he was just such a real maestro in what he did, and he was really technical, with really technique and, kind of almost like a classical musician on the electric guitar. It was very thought out, Eddie was. And he was very impressive and an inspiration to countless guitar players. The list, if you made a list of every guitar player who was influenced by Joe Satriani. Joe Satriani would probably be on that list. By Eddie Van Halen, that would be a mighty long list, because EVH is definitely a guitar god for sure. On the bass, we've got Michael Anthony. Michael Anthony definitely lays down some nice bass tracks on this album. The bass is very present in Van Halen, and Michael Anthony does a great job at that. And then on drums, we have the brother of Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen. So yeah, that is the four. That's the core four for Van Halen. They stick together. Those four guys stick together until about the early to mid 80s, about 1984, 85. Then we all know David Lee Roth breaks off and Sammy Hagar comes into the fold. But we would get into Van Hagar in a later episode. Today we are talking specifically about the debut 1978 Van Halen album, self-titled. As I said, Van Halen, one of the greatest bands of all time, American-based band, probably one of the greatest American bands, not just American though, one of the greatest bands of all time. Album was released February 10th, 1978, so that is over 40 years ago. It reached diamond certification in the U.S., and for those of you who don't know what that means, so to break it down, we've got gold certification, that is 500,000 copies in the U.S., and it's different from country to country, so this is specifically what these mean in the United States. When a song or an album reaches platinum, that is 1 million sales, or 1 million, units sold, Yeah, it's kind of different now with streaming, how they calculate that stuff, but they still have the same kind of system. And when something reaches diamond, that is 10 million. So the album has sold 10 million copies. Let me get a date of when it was certified, when it received its diamond certification. Let's see. It was certified diamond. Oh, it doesn't say. But that is the last it was sold, or it was certified. So that is that. So Van Halen, the music scene of LA in the 70s and stuff, that's where they came out of. That's where they got their rise from, playing clubs like the Whiskey A Go-Go and other bars and stuff on the LA music scene in LA. That's where they're based out of. Pasadena is their hometown, I believe. So they would play shows on the beach, or people's backyards would get tons of people to them. Van Halen was a local commodity in the region in the mid to late 70s. They eventually go on to open up for big-time bands such as Journey, and eventually the great Black Sabbath. Van Halen opened up for them. And there is even times when Van Halen opening for Black Sabbath outshined Black Sabbath at their own shows. And I think that created some tension for the guys in Black Sabbath. But just goes to show how impressive Van Halen was, even at such a young age when they're first bursting onto the scene. Very impressive, very remarkable, just someone that young age to just kind of... a lot of charisma. If I could describe Van Halen in one word, it would be charisma. So, let's get into the album, the meat and potatoes, if you will. The track by track here. So the album starts off with track 1, which if you're listening on Spotify, you probably heard off the top. I'm not sure. If you heard Running with the Devil opening this podcast, I'm not sure if that's a Spotify exclusive thing or if it's all platforms. I believe it's Spotify exclusive. So if you want to know what the fuck I'm talking about, head on over to Spotify, give the podcast a listen there. Or if you like listening to it on whatever platform you're listening to, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Overcast, I appreciate it all the same. Listens are listens at the end of the day. But I played Running with the Devil at the opening, or at least I tried. It's a new thing I'm trying, so we'll see if it works. But Running with the Devil, it's a really great song. It's a cool song. That's one of their most iconic, and that's going to be a theme with this album. Iconic songs. It seems like, Van Halen is a staple of rock radio, especially today. And a lot of those songs that you hear on rock radio and you hear people, streaming and listening to, they come off this album. This is a lot of Van Halen's hits. If you're to make a Van Halen greatest hits album, a large portion of this album, the first album, would be included. So, Running with the Devil opens it up, and Running with the Devil, Satanism. No, that's not what this is about, although that was kind of believed to be the message, although the meaning is not exactly anything to really do with the devil. But it is the second single that was released from their debut album. There was a song from the Ohio Players called Running from the Devil, so that's kind of where inspiration came from, so it's not exactly a cover. If we're talking about accolades of this song, in 2009, VH1 made a list of the greatest hard rock songs of all time, and Running with the Devil clocked in at number 9. So, high praise for this song. If you're a rock fan, you've definitely heard it before. So if we get into the structure of the song, kind of what's going on, you hear this kind of interesting thing off the top, which for a while I wasn't sure what that was. And my former guitar teacher, who used to give me lessons, Marty Owens, he told me, those are car horns. And I did a little more research when looking into recording this podcast. And sure enough, it was car horns. It was all of the group's cars, and the producer, Ted Templeton, he, mixed the horns together in a way that, would sound as a nice little opening intro to the track, and not only the track, but the album altogether, given that this is track 1, side 1, here we go. So the car horns come in, they kind of fade out. It's an interesting little thing. It's kind of fun. And then we just have the single bass note, boom, 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 and then we just get the hi-hat clicks, and then we're hitting the ground, running with the devil. Bum 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 bum. Yeah, yeah. And once Diamond Dave joins in, it's like boom. The everything is running on all cylinders. It is just wheels up. We're in the air. We're kicking ass now. It's really grooving. So once you get into the song, it's just a fun song to just listen to. It's a nice, I think Van Halen's, their music really fits for warm weather, summertime, get the windows down, just hanging out with your friends, kicking back. It's good, fun music, nothing too serious or anything like that. So yeah, Running with the Devil. If you haven't heard this song, should probably give it a listen. I think Dave, if we're talking about David Lee Roth here for a second, the vocalist, I think this is kind of a great example of his energy on the track and his just kind of his vocal interludes and his just like his just kind of fun. It's a fun style, and Eddie's solo here, it's not crazy difficult. I couldn't play it, but I think it's kind of regarded as if you're a beginner who wants to learn some Eddie Van Halen content. It's not a bad place to start, Running with the Devil. So that's track 1. But while talking about Eddie Van Halen, maybe Running with the Devil ain't some of his easier work. Maybe it's not one of his hardest things. We move on to track 2, which happens to be one of his hardest things, and that is Eruption. We're going to turn the focus from Van Halen as a whole to kind of Eddie Van Halen, the namesake of the band here. As a guitar player myself, and as Eddie Van Halen, the guitar player, this was something that he didn't invent, this style that I'm about to talk about. He really just kind of brought it into the mainstream, as he would note, but it's incredibly impressive nonetheless. And at the time, in 1978, it was so it was something that just many, many people tuned their ears in as this was different. It was something new. It was something that people hadn't heard before, and they wanted to hear more of. And if you move on into the 80s and the 90s with all the metal and stuff, tapping, which is what I'm talking about here, is all over the place. Two-handed tapping specifically, using the right hand to tap the fretboard along with the left hand. That's kind of what's going on all throughout Eruption. It's incredible. It's the impact that song, and that, it's a minute and 42 seconds or something like that. The impact that it had on all guitarists from there on out it's really remarkable. And, it's not just Eruption, but it's kind of all of Eddie Van Halen as a whole. And, we kind of saw that outpouring affection and that kind of gratitude from many great guitar players when he tragically passed away. I believe it was last October 2020. So, really sad to see Eddie pass away like that. I believe it was complications with cancer that he had been struggling with. But, you can't help but think, this person may be gone, but they really contributed a lot to music, and they really added a lot of, technique to new, guitar players' tool belts that they might not have known of or thought of before. Eddie was kind of a mad scientist in a way. Just look at his Frankenstrat guitar, It was built of different parts, and it had that funky paint job. That in its own right was kind of a mad scientist creation, and it's fun to just kind of listen, even some of the most advanced guitarists and whatnot, after Eddie passed away, I just remember seeing stuff like, I think it was, I want to say Joe Satriani, but I don't know for sure. I cannot remember who said this, but I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but they still sit back and they listen in awe when they hear Eruption. And, this track has been around since 1978. I mean, he played it in live venues since like 1975. So this song is not in any way new. It's very dated, but it still captures people's interest. And, it's one of the best instrumental pieces in rock, and one of my favorites. It's just fun to listen to, and he goes all over the place, and he's using the whammy bar, and it's a lot of fun. And if we talk about accolades, this track receives this minute and 42 chunk of Eddie just wailing on the guitar. Guitar World, U.S. Magazine, they ranked their 100 greatest guitar solos of all time in 2009, and this clocked in at number 2. No, I don't know what clocked in at number 1, but Eruption, this just adds to the list of, impact that this band was creating. So we got Running with the Devil, iconic track, Eruption, iconic for guitarists, iconic for Eddie Van Halen's legacy, iconic for the whole instrument of the guitar. It's you have an impact when you can change how people view an entire instrument. That being said, we move along to track number 3, which was their first single, I believe. But I want to make sure I get this right. I don't want to be spreading misinformation to the Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast audience. But I am, of course, talking about You Really Got Me, cover of the Kinks track that came out. Obviously, the Kinks, 60s band. I don't know too much of the Kinks. I know like this, and there might be another song or two that I know from the Kinks. But obviously, Van Halen, wanted to do this song. And I think kind of what's interesting, a lot of what Van Halen does, they got a lot of like background vocals and harmonies in their songs. And they kind of have like an oldies feel to it, fused with like a hard rock sound. And I think that's something that Van Halen does that's a lot of fun, because even if you don't know what Dave's singing, you can kind of bebop along to the background vocals. And that's kind of something I like to do on kind of just like what's the track, I'm the One, stuff. Tracks like that are just fun to talk about, or just fun to bop around with the harmonies. And You Really Got Me is another example of background vocals and harmonies playing a role in the audience's intake of the song and just the overall feel of the song together. And, the song ties in with Eruption, the way it kind of fades out, then it transitions into the da-da-da-na-na-na, and we're taking off again. So those two are pretty commonly linked together in both live venues, and they come consecutively on the album. And it's a fun song. It's maybe not be their song, and I guess there was a little beef over that, but what are you gonna do? It's a fun song. And, it's another really iconic song, something you'll hear on rock radio pretty frequently if you listen long enough. And it was their first single. And I guess when doing some research, Eddie Van Halen apparently did not like that it was their first single. He would have rather had something else go up as the first single, maybe Ain't Talking About Love or Running with the Devil or something like that. But I guess another band who I guess Eddie was friends with, or somebody like that. Yeah, Eddie was friends with a member of a band called Angel, and he had shared a demo or something of You Really Got Me, or no, not You Really, yeah, You Really Got Me, You Really Got Me. I'm getting my tracks mixed up here, but yes, You Really Got Me. And then it came out, Angel, the band, is going to release You Really Got Me, a cover of it as a single. So they rushed it out, Van Halen did, and they put it out, and Eddie was like, I really didn't know if I wanted it to work out that way, but it's the way it worked out. And I think you can say, if you look at how many people know the band Van Halen versus how many people know the band Angel, I think Van Halen, was successful. But, and then the Kinks, who the original song was, I guess some of the Kinks, they don't really like the cover aspect of it, and some just think it's fun. They just like to laugh at it or whatever. I think newer rock fans and, people who aren't really as in tune to the 60s British invasion, early stuff, I think they like the energy and the kind of vibe that it brings overall. It fuses two worlds, which is kind of what I was talking about. That is something I think Van Halen does well. Moving on to track 4, we are flying by with lightning speed here. If you haven't heard these songs, you're missing out. You gotta, after listening to this podcast, of course, if you haven't heard these songs, go give it a listen. The album's only like 35 minutes total. That's 11 tracks, 35 minutes. Why not? Why not spend a little time learning some rock history, enjoying these tracks, enjoying what Van Halen, one of the great acts of all time, has to offer. Anyway, we move on to track number 4, and that is Ain't Talking 'Bout Love, because love is rotten to the core. It's their third single. It's another, like I've said, legendary song. You hear it on rock radio, one of Van Halen's best. This is another one. Just, we got 4 great songs in a row to open up this album. And it's interesting because at the time, it's like, I wonder, did people know these were great tracks? Was this an expectation, that, this band's going somewhere? I think probably partially kind of, but then, we'll get into what the critics had to say at the end here. And, maybe some critics, didn't exactly think, Van Halen was going to be all that, but that's what critics do, they criticize. So, but we're not there yet. Ain't Talking 'Bout Love is where we are at, though. So, this song, it's fun. I like the lyrics. By the end, it's kind of just, once we get into the hey, hey, hey section, hey, 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 bump, bump, bum, wow, wow, bump, bump, bum, bum, wow, down. It's fun. I've said the word fun a lot because Van Halen, I think, is a fun act. They bring energy. They bring just kind of party music, just kind of groove, almost kind of swagger. It's good music. Apparently, according to the late great Eddie Van Halen, this song was meant to imitate kind of punk rock. Not sure how much that came across on the final cut, but kind of the simple, I guess there's only a few chords in it, so just kind of the simple nature of, 2 chords or 3 chords or whatever, which is something that is common in punk music, was what they were trying to go for here. And the song is kind of basic, of course, not totally basic because Eddie Van Halen's playing, but in that sense, it doesn't go too extreme in terms of structure or anything like that. And, it's another great song by Van Halen, 3 minutes and 50 seconds. So we go on now to track number 5, which closes out side 1, and that's I'm the One. I'm the one you love. Come on, baby, show your love. That song. Dave really cranks up the wails and the shrieks, I'll call them. I'm not going to attempt to imitate them because I cannot. I would just embarrass myself there. But, it's a good song. I like it. I think it's kind of underrated. It's not really going to be those ones that you're going to hear on the radio or you're going to hear talked about. So in that regard, maybe it's not as memorable for folks, but that doesn't take away its value, I don't think. And it definitely is still a solid song. Honey, I'm the one you want. Come on, baby, show your love, or I'm the one you love. I don't know what he says. I like to bebop along to the song. I like to have fun. And that's what the band is all about. So I'm the One is another fun song. And we move on now to side 2, to a song that is kind of popular on the radio. It would definitely go on their greatest hits, and that is Jamie's Crying. Kicks off side 2. Whoa, 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 Jamie's crying, wow, wow. And I love those little interludes Eddie Van Halen plays, a wow, wow, like just kind of little sprinkles in there, just giving it his own little touch. And this is another one where I mentioned earlier, the background vocals and harmonies, those are very evident, those are very present, and they add a layer to the track that, if they weren't there, it would kind of be more straightforward, maybe a little more boring, but it makes it a little fun. And I'm not sure if the audience right now can hear my dogs barking in the background, but I do apologize for that. I don't want to ruin this audio experience right now. But Jamie's Crying. That's what we're talking about. 3 minutes and 31 seconds. The song is in length. I like the lyrics here. This is probably one of the tracks on the album, one of the few tracks that I actually kind of follow the lyrics and I don't get lost in just the music and just kind of, drumming along and just kind of humming along. I kind of sense a narrative here, a storyline. Jamie's crying. Why is Jamie crying? Something's not right, It's centered around relationships. The line that sticks with me is, now Jamie's been in love before, and she knows what love is for. And then, basically what it goes to is, but what it isn't is one night stands. So maybe, Jamie, she's been on just a couple one night stands. She's not really finding the one. She's not really finding a real connection with someone. It's all just one night stands and sex, and it's nothing. She wants more, and, Jamie's crying. And, everybody knows the, oh, Jamie's crying, wow, wow. So as you can tell, I like to sing along with this track. I think David Lee Roth sounds great. I sound nowhere near as good as him, but it's a fun song to sing along with, and, it's a fun little song. Maybe the lyrical content isn't as fun. We got someone crying here, but I think the band, can take that, kind of like the song Jump. The Jump has a really upbeat, really synth poppy kind of sound. And that song's about suicide. So Van Halen, maybe they kind of have a knack, especially in the David Lee Roth days, because the lyrical content and the kind of theme of the band changes with Sammy Hagar versus David Lee Roth. So, kind of taking maybe darker subject matter, maybe, more on the sadder side, more on the other end of the spectrum, but still giving it that kind of rock, upbeat kind of sound. That's something that they kind of blend, and they do pretty well, I'll say. So we move on. After Jamie's Crying, we got track 7, Atomic Punk, 3:02 in length, 3 minutes and 2 seconds in length. Now, I've been mentioning the harmonies and the background vocals. Atomic Punk isn't really like that. It's kind of straightforward. Dave screaming away, pretty much does that on all the tracks, and it's a lot of fun. It's really distinct. That's what separates Dave. As I said, Dave, all about energy and charisma and bold, and that, and the other. It's a little more metal, some would say, because at this time, 1978, we think about metal. Sabbath is already around. Motorhead is there. There's some other bands that are kind of smaller, and it's kind of, hard to define. Metal isn't supremely well defined. Bands like Sabbath, when they were first coming out, they didn't really consider themselves, oh, we're here, we're a metal band, this is something new. We're just making heavy rock. And that's what they were trying to do. So metal wasn't supremely defined, and I don't think it really gets there until the 80s, kind of, when we get to the thrash metal scene, and, metal with the new wave of British heavy metal, with Judas Priest and Iron Maiden doing what they do. And Judas Priest was another band from the 70s who was kind of metal, and Iron Maiden will kick off in the 1980 with their first album. But this Van Halen, especially the technique and the styling of Eddie Van Halen, that kind of influences metal significantly. I think you could argue too, David Lee Roth kind of contributes to the metal vocal, because there's different variations in metal vocals, kind of the shrieks, that kind of part. Maybe some of that blends in, some of that bleeds over. But I think, there's an argument to be made that Van Halen has a contribution, especially in the early days, to metal. if you just want to talk about, speed playing and stuff like that, Eddie Van Halen kind of offers that. If you listen to Eruption to the, common ear or someone's first time hearing it, it's kind of hard to keep track of all those notes. So I think there's a metal impact there. It's Atomic Punk is kind of a song where they add, that's kind of evident, that hard rock kind of, there's not the, ain't talking about love. It's not kind of like harmonies. We got the background vocals, kind of like, what are we doing here? Like pop rock or like what's going on here? But it's kind of more straightforward. I like what he's doing in the intro. I don't know what he's doing, but you'd have to listen to it to understand. It's fun. What Eddie's doing. I don't know what it is. Probably could have looked into that a little more, but give it a listen and you'll know what I'm talking about. And yeah, Dave sounds great as always. So, moving on. Track number 8, Feel Your Love Tonight. Just as I said, Atomic Punk, kind of no harmonies, no background, different kind of sound, heavier, maybe reflects more metal attitude. This one, we're right back with the harmonies. I can't wait to feel your love tonight. And then they go real high up to a woo! Really high up there. Well, I don't know, not really high. He's not like breaking glass or anything. I don't know. It's an interesting transition, interesting dynamic. This is honestly one of my favorite songs on the album. I think a lot of the other ones kind of get the shine. Ain't talking about love, you really got me. Running with the Devil, Eruption, man. Those get the shine. I think Feel Your Love Tonight, it's a song you do hear on rock radio, and it's not totally underrated. It's not something nobody's ever heard, but I think it's kind of underrated. I think it's just as good as those other songs. And, when we talk about, what the song's about, look no further than the opening line. We're getting funny in the back of my car. I'm sorry, honey, if I took it just a little too far. We're talking about sex here. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about gals. That's what we're talking about. And that's a common theme of classic rock. That's a classic theme of all music, I'll say. Sex, it's what music's all about. Not entirely, but there's a large impact. Those two kind of go together. I mean, sex, drugs, rock and roll, am I right? But then again, it's not entirely what it's about. So I don't want to try to diminish any art or any bands that, are more than just, you're not just singing about, not just songs just full of any windows, There's some more for most acts. And Van Halen included. They're not just talking about, dirty deeds done dirt cheap. But I like this song. As I kind of mentioned, this is kind of where they blend kind of an older sound, kind of maybe a 60s band with the harmonies and the background vocals, and that kind of blend together with kind of Eddie's guitar playing and a more heavy rock sound. They blend the two together well. Feel Your Love Tonight, another example of doing that. We moving on to now track number 9, Little Dreamer. I don't have much to say about Little Dreamer. Of the 11 tracks on this, there are 2 that I kind of skip and don't really listen to that much and don't really stick with me and aren't super memorable. Little Dreamer is one. It's a great song. It's a fine song. Not for me, not something I really listened to a lot when I was growing up listening to this album. So kind of Little Dreamer, not played much. It's kind of a laid-back song, kind of the energy's kind of brought down. Dave kind of takes the center stage here, and it's just kind of, I think that's why it's kind of forgetful and kind of not really on the scene. And, not every song has to be in your face, and here we are, we're Van Halen, yeah! And, they can kind of take a laid-back step. So I think it kind of shows some dynamics that the band can have, but then again, I don't know if they're really going for dynamics here. So, Little Dreamer, maybe give it a listen if you're interested, but not exactly for me. Moving on to Ice Cream Man. Want to talk about a song that is full of innuendos and is all about sex. Ice Cream Man. Dave even says it off the top. Dedicate one to the ladies. Now, we were talking about covers. Not the only cover on the album. John Brim came out with this song decades earlier, and that is kind of where this is from. Not everybody really knows that it's a cover, but it is a cover. I believe it might have had a slightly different title, but the idea, it's kind of the same lyrically, I think. Let me pull up some information so I'm getting my facts accurate here. Chicago blues musician John Brim wrote the song originally, released in 1953. So Van Halen's version was released in 1978. From a song that came out in 1953. And, that was common with bands in the 70s and the 60s, kind of, taking blues songs and kind of whitewashing, whatever you want to call it, making it their own. Zeppelin did this. I guess Van Halen did this. Eric Clapton did this. It wasn't an uncommon thing to see. Although, I don't know if John Brim, let's see. Yeah, okay. John Brim. Yep. Okay, so I liked it. I like this song. What I didn't mention in the band's early days, 1976, Gene Simmons, bass player for one of my favorite bands of all time, Kiss. Everybody knows Gene Simmons, gets a lot of hate, but y'all know him. He worked on a 3-track demo with Van Halen. He was going to try to get them signed to a record company, but he had to go, on tour with Kiss, and he couldn't be just totally devoted to them. So then Ted Templeton, the guy who produces Van Halen 1, he kind of scoops him up and he gets him with, what label? What label did he get them with? Warner Brother label, and they go to Interscope in like the late 90s or early 2000s, something like that. But that's way down the line. That's not relevant now. But Ice Cream Man was one of the tracks that was on the 3-track demo that they made with Gene Simmons. I guess Gene wasn't too impressed by it, but I guess David Lee Roth was really stumping for this song. He wanted to keep it because he wanted a testament to the blues. He wanted something to kind of represent the blues. So I think that's great, and dedicate one to the ladies. It's a fun song, I enjoy it. It got a little acoustic guitar kind of vibe going on, but excuse me. But yeah, it's a nice song. Nice song towards the end of the album. Slightly underrated, but still. It's Van Halen. Not much of their stuff is totally off the radar that nobody knows about. And then we get to the last song, On Fire. Now, I said there was 2 songs on this album. Kind of skip. Don't pay much attention to. On Fire is the other one. I've been listening to it a few times the last day or so. It closes out the album. Apparently on their 78 World Tour, they used it as an opening track. And something else they do when recording this album, or this track specifically, they didn't use a lot of overdubs, especially with vocals, but this track has some vocal overdubs, with Dave singing over himself and other vocalists included as well. And then, it's just kind of a straightforward song, 3 minutes and 1 second, and it just kind of fades out. And again, not super memorable, not much to take away from this track. But that gets us through all 11 tracks. Let's see what time we're at. We're at about 37 minutes here, so I always try to get to at least 30 minutes, so I've been doing better. I don't know if you guys have been liking the podcast or not, but, be sure to, if you guys think I should change anything or tweak the way I do things, let me know. I love to get feedback from you guys. But speaking of feedback, let's get into my final thoughts. Well, actually, let me think of something I said I was going to do. The release. The critics, what do they think of it? So, soon after its release, Van Halen became regarded by fans and critics as one of rock's greatest debut albums. However, its initial critical reception was mostly negative. So here's what Charles M. Young of Rolling Stone said in 1978, quote, "In 3 years, Van Halen is going to be fat and self-indulgent and disgusting. Follow Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin right into the toilet. In the meantime, they're likely to be a big deal. But he also wrote that Van Halen's secret is not doing anything that's original while having the hormones to do it better than all those bands who have become fat and self-indulgent and disgusting. Edward Van Halen has mastered the art of lead/rhythm guitar in the tradition of Jimmy Page and Joe Walsh. Several riffs on this record beat anything Aerosmith has come up with in years. Vocalist David Lee Roth manages the rare hard rock feat of infusing the largely forgettable lyrics with energy and not sounding like a castrato at the same time. Drummer Alex Van Halen and bassist Michael Anthony are competent and properly unobtrusive. My mistake. So, some people, thought, hey, they're going to burn out real quick, but clearly they didn't. Made decades throughout the 80s, or made albums throughout the 80s and the 90s, and even one off here or there in the 2000s. But this is definitely their, I don't want to call it their peak, but it's kind of, there's a lot of great content on here, but it might kind of be their peak. But my thoughts on the record, I think I just kind of shared them. Love this album. It's one of the best albums ever. I think if you're a rock fan, you haven't heard this album, you're not a rock fan. You should listen to this album if you haven't. If you're a guitar player, you should listen to the whole album either way, but Eruption, turn it on, your mind will be blown. I love David Lee Roth. I prefer him over Sammy Hagar, so when that episode comes out, you'll already know how I feel. I love Eddie Van Halen. He amazes me. I can't play like him. I don't know if I'll ever be able to play like him, but I'm sure, I guess, if I practice enough. I didn't talk about Michael Anthony or Alex Van Halen a lot, but they are properly unobtrusive. Now, they contribute a good sound to the band. They make the band what it is. If it wasn't for them, we might have a whole different band. So, it comes down to rating this album out of 10. My last episode, I gave Megadeth's Rust in Peace a 9.7 out of 10. And I had to think, do I prefer this or Rust in Peace? Because if I gave Rust in Peace a 9.7, what do I got to give this? Because I don't know if I want to give it a 10 out of 10, because I don't like every single track on here. So I sat and I thought, and I concluded a 9.8 out of 10 would be the proper rating. So that's it, 9.8 out of 10. That's all for this week, folks. Hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Let me see in my notes what we got next week for next week's episode. Episode number 10. I can't believe we're coming up on episode number 10 already. Here we go. Episode number 10, I'm going to be talking about something that some of you might not be that big of a fan of, but I want to talk about it. Hair metal. Some of the hardcore metal fans, whether it's thrash metal or anything like that, hair metal, might not be a fan of it. But I think hair metal has a significant contribution to the metal world, and I think we should talk about it. So next week, talking about the best hair metal bands. Maybe I'll get a guest. I don't know if you guys prefer the guest or just me rambling for 40 minutes or so, but hair metal is the topic next week, best hair metal bands. If you got a hair metal band you really want me to talk about, DM me on my Instagram page, Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, or you can DM me on my personal account, OwenW409. Be sure to check out both of those, and as always, never stop rockin'.